person at the time called Don Diego de Azambuja. They came to see the chief at the time called Nana Kwame Nkrumah, negotiated to have this plot of land and have the castle built. It is on record that the chief was hesitant in giving out the land, citing cultural differences to be a problem in the future. In fact, he even went on further to say that friends will be better friends if they don't live or stay together. But upon assurances and persuasions, he finally gave in. And that was the first time in the history of this world that a title to a plot of land would legally be transferred from an African chief to an European, and for that matter, the Portuguese. Materials that will be used in putting up this structure, majority of them were imported, with the exception of course, water and sand, which was readily available here. And when this structure was first put up, all the rooms you see on the ground floor here, where they are warehouses where they were keeping their goods. But from the 1500s, something nasty happened. What happened? They shifted from the trade in gold to trade in human beings. And when it got started, these same rooms were then converted into holding cells where the enslaved Africans were kept. At the peak of the trade, this castle will talk about a minimum of 1,000 captives. 600 of them were men and 400 were women. And the women were occupying this section and the men were down. Now, I try to make people understand that the Portuguese, whilst at the castle, did not just get up and say they were going into buying and selling of people. No, meaning something brought about it. And before we look into what brought about all this, we need to understand that slavery in itself, one form or the other, has been with all the race. Meaning that we, the Africans, had an idea about what slavery was. But then, of course, how it was structured in our culture was not the same as they introduced it to us. Indeed, that person that would be seen as a slave before the European came ought to be seen as a servant, because in most cases such person had rights. He could marry, raise free kids, acquire properties, pay the price on his head. He could become a free person. One thing that was even unique about our system would be the fact that a person can shift from being a slave into a royal status. How would that happen? One, when the man proves to have managerial abilities or military skills, he could become the caretaker of the master's household. Descendants of such men were royals. Women got married into the system. By that, they all ceased to be servants, and they were royals. Some people managed to shift from one community, began a community by themselves, and by that shift, they were all regarded as royals. And in Ghana here, I can tell you for a fact, there are so many towns, communities, and villages whose ancestors, as a matter of fact, were not royals, but servants or slaves. But because of hard work, marriage, or the shift, they are all royals. And partly because of that, it becomes a taboo to refer to these as slaves. There were three basic ways in which a person could be described as a slave or servant before the European came. One, we talk about prisoners of wars. Two, we talk about those who were given out as pounds for debt, meaning that what? I come to borrow from you. I don't have whatever it takes to pay at the time. I can let somebody come and serve, and the period under which the person serves, the person will be seen as a slave. And also those who were convicted for certain offenses. So all of these were in our system before the European came. But the whole of the story changed when the Spaniard got onto the so-called new discoveries. Now they talk about the fact that not long after going there, gold and silver factories were opened, sugar, tobacco, coffee plantations were established. Yes, the indigents there wanted the riches of the land, but were not ready to do the hard work. So they were subjected to the work. And the story says that Spanish brutalities, overwork, and the effects of European diseases were decimating the local population rapidly. So a man called Bartolomeo de las Casas, who had sympathy on the natives, suggested for Africans to be used. One school of thought suggests, he said what he said, based on the fact that we, the Africans, were already doing the same work under similar climatic conditions, therefore we were a better substitute. Others suggest he even said, we never had soul. And that truly got my attention, because not long before we had the soul, they came to say how we lost it within these few years. I'm still working on that. But to prove the man wrong or right, 1512, 1515, some Africans were first taken from Spain. Some were sent to Hispaniola, present-day Haiti. Others were sent to Santo Domingo, present-day Dominican Republic, where they were tried or tested. And true to the man's word, these Africans proved fit for the work. In fact, it was proven that one African in strength was compared to 4, the natives. So, demand for Africans then got started. And that actually came as the beginning of what could be described as the transatlantic slave trade. The mass exodus of Africans from their own motherland to an unknown land. 1637, the locals here were fed up with the Portuguese, looking for saviors. They saw the saviors in the Dutch. What they saw in them, I still do not know. But they helped the Dutch, who fought the Portuguese, defeated them and took over this castle from them. When the Dutch came in, they were not the angels the locals were looking out for. In fact, they even extended the walls of the structure and brought in more captives. 1807, the trade was officially abolished by the English. 1814, the Dutch also officially abolished the trade, but those over here at the castle were still buying and selling people. So what was known as illegal slave trade started from that point on. At the latter part, when they realized that they were no longer making any profit, they sold this castle to the English in 1872. When the English got in, the trade was over. But it is not also to say that the English never engaged in the trade. No. However, at the time, they were doing it at Cape Coast Castle. So during the Second World War, they brought in men from all English-speaking West Africa, and they were trained to fight for them. Some were fighting for them in Burma and others India. And we call these the Royal West African Frontier Forces. When the World War was over in 1948, they used this place as a police training school. So the English were in control until 1957, when Ghana became an independent state. Then we kindly asked the English to go back home. So this structure as it stands now is 542 years. The Portuguese were here for the first 155 years. The Dutch were here for 235 years. The English were in this particular one for 85 years. Ghana, the last group, we are 67 after our independence, and we are still counting. This is the largest, the biggest, and the oldest of all the castles when you talk about transatlantic slave trade in all tropical sub-Saharan Africa. And in 1979, it was designated by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Of course, for that reason, we have opened our doors for everyone to visit. So that is by way of brief history into the background of the place. As we go along, if you have any question, do not hesitate.
I have one right now.
First question, please.
Now, you mentioned that the Africans reached out to the Dutch, and the Dutch proved not to be the angels that they thought they were. So I'm guessing that at some point there must have been some resistance or fighting between the two, the Dutch and Africans.
There was, yeah.
Obviously, we lost. Is that because the Dutch and the Portuguese, as well as the English, all had superior weapons?
Yes, sir.
I'm guessing.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah, the ideal element that was very common was the weapons. You know, at a time, we had what you call intertribal wars. Bigger tribes were fighting the smaller ones and taking over them. So the only way you could protect yourself was to get the weapons. And how do you get the weapons?
Right,
you didn't manufacture it here, so you have to trade it with your people to get a weapon so that you could also defend yourself.